It's been quite some time since we talked explicitly about the ever-mysterious Hell chapter on the channel. Unbelievably, it's been over 2 years now since the one-shot chapter released back in 2021. Perhaps still the single most exciting thing to happen to the franchise since the original series ended, and yes, I'm personally including the Thousand Year Blood War arc anime in that proclamation. The truth is, the Hell chapter brought with it everything I ever wanted from potential new Bleach content in the post-source material era. When it was revealed that we were getting an all-new one-shot chapter to celebrate Bleach's 20th anniversary, of course I was extremely excited. The possibilities were endless, but truth be told, the most I expected really was a fairly light-hearted look at where our favourite characters were after the series had ended, and little more than that. And trust me, I would have been grateful if that was it. I could never have imagined, though, what the one-shot would actually consist of. What we got from it was something very different, something that has spawned endless speculation in the 2 years since, including this video, and something that I think paints a picture of an incredibly bright and compelling future for Bleach and its story, if the arc actually materialises, that is. And, for the purpose of today's video, we're going to assume that it will. What we actually got from the one-shot was a thrilling opening to a brand new arc set at the furthest point in Bleach's timeline to date, beyond even chapter 686, featuring the return of previously deceased characters, a new sinister threat, and a long-awaited focus on Hell itself. But should the Hell arc actually happen, there's been one question on my mind, perhaps above all else, and I have an awful lot of questions regarding this chapter, but that question is, who will be the villains? Admittedly, the well has kind of dried up. The Shinigami were of course the enemies of the first arc, then followed by the Hollows and the Arankar, then humans in the Lost Agent arc, and then finally of course the Quincy in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, so where do we go from here? The one-shot does dangle a few threads in front of us. The resurrected Xyloporo, the former 8th Espada, seems to point towards the return of the Espada as a villainous faction, while the crazy twist involving dead captains finding themselves in Hell means the list is practically endless for potential returning faces. I mean, there's 1,000 years of Gotei 13 history to pull from after all. Let's take a look at what choices there might be based on what little we currently know, and maybe even speculate a little about potential new characters that could be introduced too. I'd actually planned to release this video around Halloween as it felt fitting, but I just sort of ran out of time unfortunately, so here it is now instead. Let's dive into who the villains of the Hell arc could be. Before we get started on the video, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now for more Bleach content like this every single week. And if you enjoyed the video when you're done with it, make sure to give it a thumbs up as well to help support me and the channel. If you want to take the support from me another step further, I do also have a Patreon as well. And as always, I want to say a massive thank you and give a huge shout out to everyone supporting me there over on Patreon. I really do appreciate each and every one of you so very much. And yes, there will be spoilers for both events of the Thousand Year Blood War arc that haven't yet been animated, and of course the Hell chapter if you haven't yet read it, although I'm wondering what you're doing watching this video if that's the case, in the video to come. So probably the best place to begin is simply by looking at what little we know so far. The Hell chapter is very enigmatic, but it does reveal a few eye-opening details. Xyloporo, like I said, having been cast into Hell upon his death in the Arankar arc, has returned, but greatly transformed. Xyle reveals that thanks to the death of Yhwach and the disappearance of Aizen, personally by the way, I don't read too much into that line, I assume it just refers to Aizen's imprisonment and then his prisoner garb, keeping his Reiatsu close to him at all times. Because of both of their disappearances, the balance has now shifted. However, the balance shifting alone wasn't what broke open the gates of Hell. It was then sending 3 extremely powerful souls to Hell, one after the other in fairly quick succession in the wake of this balance tipping. Of course, those souls are none other than Yamamoto, Unohana, and finally UKITAKE, and that has enabled the gates of hell to be pried open from the other side. I would say, based on this, it seems like the premise for the story of the Hell Arc will be attempting to prevent some kind of an invasion or a spillover, perhaps into all three worlds, by the denizens of hell. We don't really have a motive for the arrival of Xyle and the Hell Hollows outside of simply causing trouble, but this first chapter really does kick everything into motion. From this point, presumably, the Soul Society will be racing to prevent a major catastrophe, as we've seen the spillover effects of this in Soul Society itself as well, with the phosphoplasm lingering in the air. At the same time, Ichigo's son, Kazui, seems to have some strange, unholy connection to hell itself, as he's seen opening the new hellish doorways that take the shape of toothy mouths in order to guide lonely spirits inside. A lot of the discourse surrounding Kazui since the chapter released has been in relation to him having some kind of mysterious, sinister power, and that could certainly be the case, but I can't help but wonder if it's actually simpler than that. It kind of feels to me like the most likely answer here is that Kazui is being manipulated by someone. Someone from hell managed to get into contact with the son of Ichigo Kurosaki and then managed to convince him to lure spirits into hell itself for most likely nefarious purposes. When Kazui claps his hands together to open the doorway, several eyeballs appear in the air around him, and these seem to be the eyes of the gates of hell, the skeletons that hold those doors, as they're later seen reforming in those very same skeletons, who then gaze down upon Kazui at the end of the chapter. We're going way into speculation territory now already, but it's possible the eyes belong not to those skeletons that hold the doors, but to whoever Kazui has been in contact with. And when Kazui performs his ritual to open the gateway, all he's actually doing is inadvertently letting this shadowy person know that it's time to open the door and receive some more unwitting sacrifices. This feels like a massive tangent, and in some respects it is, but at the same time, this video does beg the question at its core: who are the villains of the Hell Arc? And, well, I'd be amazed if Kazui hasn't already been in contact with them. Also, interestingly, Kon and this random spirit have both peered into hell itself. They know much more than we do. Anyway, let's look at the list of candidates based on what we've seen so far. First up, the most prominent villain in the chapter is none other than the former 8th Espada, Xyle Grans, who makes a surprising return when he emerges from hell to attack Renji and his daughter Ichika. Of course, we've seen Xyle in hell before as part of the tie-in chapter that was released alongside the 4th Bleach movie, but neither the movie nor that chapter are canon anymore. It just seems to me like Kubo liked the idea of Xyle being in hell and so took it from that. As mentioned earlier, Xyle is heavily transformed and barely resembles his former self at all, save for his striking pink hair. Although Xyle takes centre stage in this chapter and seems to be strong enough to seriously wound Renji, he's clearly not the main villain. But what is his position in the greater world of hell? Has Xyle come to the human world of his own volition, or is he here under orders? Xyle calls himself a jailer of hell, which would imply he is in charge of a subset of prisoners within a jail. Whether that jail is hell itself or an actual prison inside hell, we don't know. Now again, this is only speculation on my part, but Xyle no longer seems to be a hollow. In fact, his hollow hole has moved to outside his body in really awesome detail, and he himself says that he has been able to cast aside his hollow yoke, which essentially is an attachment of sorts. So Xyle seems to have become something totally new in the couple of years he spent in hell, perhaps a demon of sorts, and that will become even more important a bit later on. Since we know so little, it's difficult to gauge how powerful Xyle is right now, but interestingly, his transformation at least seems to be fueled in part by his own hate and suffering. As he speaks with Renji, huge, gnarled horns emerge from his head, representing in his own words his torment oozing from his brain. I wonder then if Xyle looked like his normal self when he awoke in hell initially, but years of festering in hate and anger likely directed towards the people who defeated him, Mayuri, Renji, Uryu, have turned him into this creature that we see in front of us, and the reason he suddenly gains these horns out of nowhere is because he is gazing upon one of the targets of that hatred. It's definitely possible that his skeletal, flaming arm could also be a result of this monstrous degradation. The chain-like markings on his body seem to indicate he is shackled somehow, however, as though he answers to a new master now. Interestingly, the chains seem to be more than mere markings. One of them covers his left eye, and that eye is either missing or completely blotted out as a result. The chains seem to be personalised to the individual to a degree, as well as the lines running from beneath Xyle's eye are reminiscent of his facial markings in his resurrection. The Hell Hollows that accompanied him on their invasion of the human world are in a similar situation. Their hollow holes have also been moved to outside of their bodies, and none of them emit any reiatsu whatsoever. Even after the vice captains perceive them and engage them, these Hell Hollows do not emit any kind of spiritual pressure. Interestingly though, of all the Shinigami there, only Ichika Abarai is able to sense them before actually seeing them. I find this last part about them not having any reiatsu to be particularly interesting. It's almost as if they don't exist at all within the world of Bleach anymore. Anyway, returning to this idea that Xyle has a new master now, Kubo did something very interesting, I think, by introducing us to both an Espada and a captain that have both fallen to hell in the same chapter. Before Xyle can continue his assault, he's impaled through the back by, seemingly, UKITAKE, who has only just arrived in hell as of that very moment. Is UKITAKE dragging Xyle back to hell because he's trying to save Ichigo, or because he now commands Xyle? One last thing that's interesting about Xyle is that the captains who fall to hell are all given epithets, new titles, and Xyle knows them, as he refers to Yamamoto as Court Guard Founder and Unohana as Death Sword. But not only that, he knows Ukitake's epithet as well, being Kamikake Godsworn, despite the fact that Ukitake has only just arrived. And that takes me back to Xyle being the jailer of hell. What if the fallen captains are all prisoners and he's one of many villains in charge of overseeing them? Even if there is a mysterious new villain in charge of hell itself, this would be the most likely scenario for the Espada to be the top dog bad guys again, but admittedly I don't see that happening. Escalation is key across various story arcs, and with the Hell Arc potentially being the new final arc of Bleach, what better escalation is there than to have the Espada now only be foot soldiers of an even worse villainous group? Before we move on from here, let's quickly look at what other Arrancar could find themselves appearing as jailers in the arc. A hollow needs to be cleansed by a Zanpakuto in order to move on to either Soul Society or Hell, so that presumably removes both Baragon and Ulquiorra from the equation, as neither of them were dealt the final blow by a Zanpakuto. Baragon was killed by his own power, while Ulquiorra was almost obliterated by a Cero that then basically finished him off. So, looking at the Espada with particularly despicable personalities that presumably they carried over from life, since they would have become the dominant personality, the dominant soul during their growth and evolutionary process, that likely leaves Yami, Aranero and Neutra as perfect candidates to be jailers. But again, that's merely speculation. For now, let's move along to talk about the captains in question. So as you can see already, it's difficult to work out what allegiances are currently active in Hell. Who works for who? Remember that any fallen Espada are in Hell for a totally different reason to the captains. The captains are in Hell thanks to the Konso Reisai ceremony the Gotei 13 performs for them 12 years after their funeral rites. Them being in Hell has absolutely nothing to do with how they lived their lives when they were alive. The same can't be said for the Espada. As a hollow, or maybe former hollow by this point, Xyle is in Hell because he committed atrocious crimes while living as a human. We of course learn this right at the start of the series, when the hollow Shrieker is dragged to Hell as a result of him being a serial killer as a human. But anyway, there are a few odd things about UKITAKE appearing in Hell like this, the most obvious being the fact that Sogyo no Kotowari UKITAKE Shikai is now colossal. I wonder if that's an indication that everything in Hell is either absurdly massive Or maybe captains are no longer capable of controlling their Reiatsu, causing it to fluctuate to an incredible degree. If the captains are all still good guys in Hell and are prisoners of those deemed jailers, then the story could be a race against time to rescue them all before they succumb to Hell completely. Maybe over time, as their suffering worsens, they too will transform like Xyle and become one with this sinister realm. Don't forget that Xyle has been dead and in Hell for a lot longer than Yamamoto, Unohana and UKITAKE, as their souls have only been sent to Hell as a result of the Konsou Reisai, which took place 12 years after they actually died. The slightly more interesting angle regarding the captains, however, is that they might now be evil now that they're in Hell. Though admittedly, we've seen nothing that would indicate the captains would automatically become monsters upon their arrival there, as Xyloporo's personality is the same as it was before, and he was already monstrous. I would absolutely love to see the story of Yamamoto, Unohana or UKITAKE's soul arriving in Hell for the first time though. That rude awakening is likely to induce a fair bit of torment and suffering in itself. If time spent in Hell is a factor though, well, there are plenty of captains of the Gotei 13 who have been dead far longer than Yamamoto and the others. For example, the original captains of the Gotei 13 have presumably been in Hell for upwards of 500 years, if not longer. They'll have likely become truly demonic in that time and may act as the main villains of the arc. Perhaps they've decided after all this time that they've had enough of toiling away in Hell. Maybe as bloodthirsty as they supposedly were, they're sick of seeing this new, complacent, peaceful Gotei 13 living so carefree and have decided it's time to supplant them. Again, this is guesswork, but it's so much fun trying to decide what angle the story will take when it's brand new like this. The original captains of the Gotei 13 were introduced to us briefly in chapter 511, but we finally met them properly for the first time in episode 7 of the Thousand Year Blood War arc anime, where we were shown their designs in full, including this wonderful colour spread from Kubo himself. Maybe Kubo only created their complete designs for this brief appearance in the anime, but I hope he has bigger plans for them, as they look fantastic and I'd love to see them in action. The Hell Arc is a perfect opportunity to bring them back, as well as anyone else from the history of Soul Society that Kubo wants to resurrect. Maybe some former Kenpachi, for example. So, from the discussions everyone has been having, I think people are in agreement that the most likely characters to return are Captains and Espada. But could there be any other denizens of Hell determined to make a return? Well, I think it's pretty unlikely, actually. The only other major force that has been mostly killed is of course the Vandenreich, and the sternritter operate on a totally different level to everyone else involved in the cycle. Their souls are not their own. They all belong to Yhwach, save for Gerard Valkyrie and Pernida Parnkajaz. The soul of every single other sternritter returns to Yhwach upon death, effectively, I assume, removing them from the cycle of rebirth. That being said, Kubo can do whatever he likes. It's his world after all. He could make up a rule that says upon Yhwach's death, the absorbed sternritter souls were all dispersed back into the cycle, and now they've all become souls, if we consider they were all supposed to be humans somehow prior to their deaths. Either way, I think it's pretty unlikely any dead sternritter return, though of course I'd be happy to be proven wrong. So, regarding the villains of the Hell Arc, so far we've got two, I would say, pretty clear options. The Espada acting as jailers, controlling the prisoners of Hell, who in this instance are the captains that have fallen after their deaths. The second option, and the one I think is probably more likely, is that the captains are in charge of Hell, perhaps overpowering the Espada in some kind of terrible occult hierarchy, and the Espada are merely their foot soldiers. And this seems especially likely if the original Gotei 13 still exist in the darkness somewhere in some capacity, having become totally and utterly transformed. Which leads me nicely onto my final point. I mentioned earlier that Xyle barely seems to resemble a Hollow anymore. Instead, he's almost become something completely new. A denizen of Hell is seemingly its own race, and much of what made Xyle an Arancast seems to be gone. His mask fragments are no longer present, and neither is his Zanpakuto. Can he still use any of his former powers? He now seems to wield the very chains of Hell itself as his primary form of attack, another hint that he's become something totally different. That leaves us, of course, with perhaps the most exciting option of the bunch, and probably the most likely of them all, though again I'm totally unsure. But it seems unlikely to me that Hell has been left ungoverned since the dawn of time. Interestingly, Hell is never included in the 3 worlds that were created by Rayo, so it's likely primordial in nature, which again is kind of weird when you consider it is a part of the cycle of life and death, so I'm not entirely sure how that would work in a world without life and death, but there you go. It's possible that Hell is like Hueco Mundo in nature and is completely lawless. Maybe a strong force emerged at one point and took over some of the realm, like with Hueco Mundo, but honestly, we have already seen that with the Hollows. I'd much prefer it if Hell was a more organised form of evil. It's well known that Kubo has taken major inspiration from Buddhism and Buddhist mythology when crafting the universe of Bleach itself, and I would fully expect to see that again here. If we look at Xyle as an example, it's possible demons or something demonic exist in the world of Bleach, and the longer a soul spends in Hell, the more suffering and torment they undergo, the more they too become a demon. In Japanese Buddhism, the underworld or Hell is governed by King Enmao and his attendants, fellow judges and kings who place condemned souls on trial. As Lord of the Underworld, it's easy to see Enmao and his judges working as inspiration for a potential new organisation of villains who the Damned Espada serve, and possibly the captains too. There's no reason to believe Hell won't introduce a brand new race to the Bleach mythos, and demons seem like a perfect fit. Perhaps the rulers of the Underworld entrap souls in Hell, fill them with suffering and pain until they become demons themselves, and then enslave them, binding them to their command. One thing I do struggle with, though, if there is a race of supervillains living in Hell all along that command and control this entire realm, is the idea that the Soul Society either doesn't know these beings exist or seemingly just don't acknowledge them. It's hard to believe that the Gotei 13 hasn't had any contact with a potential ruler of Hell at all, especially since a Shinigami is able to send a Hollow to Hell with their Zanpakuto. That means there's some kind of link there, and perhaps that will be explored by the Hell Butterflies and their connection to both the Soul Society and Hell respectively. After all, while the Soul Society and the Vandenreich may have quite literally been two sides of the same coin, more than any other realm, Hell is the other kind of half of Soul Society, and for them to be responsible custodians of the afterlife, I would be very surprised if Soul Society had no idea what was going on in Hell whatsoever. And there are other oddities as well. Were there any other powerful Reiatsu holding the gates of Hell shut before Yhwach and Aizen? Because there absolutely must have been, because the two of them collectively haven't really been around all that long. And as far as we know, the residents of Hell have never tried anything like this before, though that could change, of course. At the end of the day, there's still just so much we don't know, and I continue to be extremely hopeful that the Hell Arc will continue. It seems to me like the most likely choice for the villains of the arc will be a brand new, likely demonic race that rules the underworld and has potentially both the Espada and the captains in their servitude, and are perhaps based on this idea of King Enmao and his attendants and judges. Or the captains are the prisoners of the realm, and the villainous Espada who have been able to adapt frighteningly well are in control of them now. But I mean, I don't really want to see the Espada as the main bad guys once again. I'd much rather they were the foot soldiers of something brand new. Perhaps UKITAKE stabbing Xyle was a last-ditch effort from him to assist Ichigo before succumbing to his new situation. We just don't know. It is also possible that some very old faces like the original Gotei 13 will have become demons too, and now rule Hell if there is no actual ruler in place, having taken over the realm through sheer power. Either way, there is loads to look forward to, and I personally can't wait. I just hope it's not too much longer now. Maybe, if the Hell Arc does exist, we'll hear about it once the anime's run is over? Again, this is only the guesswork of an excited fan, but there we go. But that's it for the video, guys. As always, I really hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts and feelings down in the comments below. Who do you think are going to be the main villains of the Hell Arc? What would you like to see? Would you like to see the Espada back as the main bad guys? Do you think it's more likely the captains will be in command of Hell now, having turned into perhaps demons themselves? Or do they all exist under the servitude of perhaps a sinister new faction of villains? I'd love to hear your thoughts as always. Make sure to hit subscribe if you haven't done already, give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and until next time I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.